Hey guys, we are going to be looking at tables and graphs and equations and relating those all back to rates. So let's look at the first one. It says Nicole is driving 105 miles in 3 hours. So they want us to fill in the table and then use that to fill in the graph. So the rate that they're giving us is 105 miles for 3 hours. So the first thing I would do is find that unit rate. Remember, we're going to set up our proportion 105 miles over 3 hours. And if we're finding unit rate, we're going to set it up equal to something over 1 hour. So I want to know how much it is for 1 hour. Remember, we are going to cross multiply and then divide. So when I multiply, I get 105 divided by 3. So 3 goes into 1 0 times, but goes into 10 3 times, because 3 times 3 is 9. 1 left over, bring down my 5. 3 goes into 15 5 times, which is exactly 15, so nothing left over. So when I go back over here to my table, I can fill in, it was 35 miles per every 1 hour. I'm going to erase that so I have some space. Okay, so now that I know it's 35 miles for every 1 hour, I can fill in the rest of my table. So since I know it's 35 for each one, I can just multiply each of these by 35, because 1 times 35 is how I got 35. 3 times 35 is how we get 105. So if I go ahead and do the rest of these, multiply the rest, it should be able to help me fill in my table. So I'll do the first one with you, and then I'm going to let you do 4 and 5. So we should just be setting it up 35 times 2. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So we are getting 70 miles for 2 hours. Go ahead and pause the video and do 4 and 5 now. Okay, so now you can see that I did my work for 35 times 4 and got 140 miles per 4 hours. And I did my work for 5 hours and got 175 miles. If you did not get those same answers, why don't you pause it and look and see if you can see what you did wrong. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. So now if you look here kind of in the middle, they're showing us this equation. So if you notice, it says here that it's going to be y equals blank x, and notice underneath I put it's going to be the unit rate. That's always what number goes in here. That's exactly what we did to fill in this table. We took our x, so like 1 hour, times our unit rate, which we said was 35, and it gave us our y. So when we did x was 1 times 35, it gave us 35. When we did x was 2 times 35, it gave us our answer as 70. And that's kind of how we could keep filling in this table, or we could use it for anything. If we wanted to find out how many miles she can drive in 15 hours, we could just say 35 times 15 to find out how many miles it will go. So this equation, you will always fill in y equals the unit rate for the equation and then times x. Okay, the next thing is independent and dependent variables. You've probably seen these already in science this year. If you haven't yet, you should soon. So remember that an independent variable kind of stands alone. It doesn't rely on anyone else. It's just kind of keep going on its own. Dependent, though, depends on what's happening with the independent variable. So you should always think like which one is kind of changing based on the other one changing. So here, the more hours that I drive, the further I can go. So the miles that I go is depending on how many hours I drive for. So my independent variable is my hours, right? They're gonna just keep going, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But my dependent is my miles, and it goes up depending on how long I drive for. Okay, so finally we are ready to take all this information and put it over here on our graph. So we will always put our independent variable on the x-axis, and you should notice here in our table it was even labeled as our x. So our independent is going to go here on the x-axis. Remember, x goes across and the y is up here to the sky, y to the sky. So I'm going to put my independent variable of hours down here on the bottom. And I'm going to put my dependent variable going up along the y. So this was my miles. And a lot of times you'll get a graph and it's already numbered for you, so you're just going to have to go with whatever numbers they put on there. This one we left it empty, so when they leave it empty, just make it really easy on yourself and use the numbers you found in your chart. So here I know I have to go from 1 hour up to 5 hours. Usually when you do a graph, you want to try to spread it out as much as you can. You don't want your whole graph to just be here in this little corner and leave all this blank space. So I'm going to try to spread it out, my 1 hours through 5 hours along the X, and then I'll do the same up the Y. Try to spread it out as much as possible. If you don't use the whole graph, it's okay, but your goal is to use it more than half. So here, since I can see I have a lot of lines, remember the very corner has to be 0, so I'm going to count, I think, by 2, and every 2 I'm going to say is 1 hour. So there's 1 hour, skip 1, there's 2, skip 1, 3, skip 1, 4, and skip 1, 5. So there are my hours. I have to at least go to 5. If you went past that, that's okay. You're definitely allowed to go further. Then going up the side, again, I might as well make this easy. I definitely can't count by ones because I'll only get up to 10. I won't even be able to plot my first point. So I'm going to make it really easy. I'm going to skip count again, so every 2 boxes, but I'm going to use these numbers right here from the chart. So I'm going to say this is 35 miles. Skip 1, and now this is 70. I can skip 1 and call this 105. Skip 1, call this 140. And skip 1 more and get 175. All right, so now we can plot our points. So again, on our chart, we said 1 hour was 35 miles, so I'm going to match it up. 1 hour is 35 miles. 2 hours we said was 70. 3 hours was 105 miles. 4 hours is 140 miles. And 5 hours we got 175 miles. Notice that this is kind of lining up in a nice, pretty straight line. It should do that. If you fill in your chart right, you find all your rates properly, then it should be going in a straight line. And there's one more dot we can add down here at this origin, that 0, 0. Because think about it, if I drive for 0 miles, or sorry, for 0 hours, I'm going to go 0 miles. So I can always plot that as well. It should be starting there, and then connect this with a line and an arrow at the end. That basically shows that I could go anywhere in between here, so I don't have to drive for a full mile. I could just drive for half an hour, and here are my miles that I would go. So anywhere along here we could do this, and then it could keep going because that's not really the end of the graph. It goes on forever. Okay, so let's look at number 2. So we're going to start off the same way. It says Chuck made $50 for 4 hours mowing Miss Fairley's grass. So the first thing we want to do is find our unit rate. We already know it is $50 for 4 hours. I want to know what it is for 1 hour. Remember, anytime we're setting up these proportions, we are going to cross multiply and then divide. So 50 times 1 is 50, divided by 4. 4 goes into 5 one time. With 1 left over, bring down your 0. 4 goes into 10 2 times, which is 8. 2 left over. I can't have a remainder, so remember this when we add our decimal, raise your roof, whoop, whoop, and then bring down a 0. So 4 goes into 20 5 times. So we are getting 12.5, but we are talking about money. So keep in mind, we need to make sure this looks like money. 12.5 does not really look like money. So we want to add that placeholder 0 at the end. So it's $12.50. That is for 1 hour. We already knew it was $50 for 4 hours. We need to fill in the rest of this table. So remember, our unit rate is what goes into our equation. So y equals 12.5x. I don't have to put the 0 here when I'm just talking about it as the unit rate, like to be multiplied, but I do when I'm talking about it here in the table because it's talking about money. So to fill in the rest of this table, I need to multiply each of these by 12.5. So I'm going to multiply 2 by 12.5, I'm going to multiply 3 by 12.5, and I'm going to multiply 5 by 12.5. Go ahead and pause the video and do that and come back and check your answers with me. All right, so here I showed my work for all 3. here is 12.5 times 2, and I got $25. 12.5 times 3, I got $37.50. Notice again, it was 37.5, and then I added that placeholder 0. And then down here I did my work for 12.5 times 5, which was 62.5, so $62.50. If you didn't get any of those correct, pause the video, look at my work, and see if you can find your mistake. All right, so now we're ready to answer these bottom two questions. Really, you should have already known these answers before doing the table at all. Just looking at the graph, just looking at the situation, looking at the table or looking at the situation, you can answer these. But they're gonna be helpful when we go to make our graph. So again, think about which one depends on the other. So however many hours Chuck works, he can make more money, right? The amount of money he makes depends on how many hours he works. So the money, the dollars, is his dependent, and it depends on the hours that he works. Again, that is helpful when we go over here to the graph. Our independent should always be on our X. Our dependent should be on our Y. I know some people like to remember this. I'll show you real quick a little trick. The I for independent goes here, and a D for dependent goes here with this axis. Really, I think if you just understand the difference between independent and dependent and can remember the X and the Y, then you will be just fine. Okay, so now let's go ahead and graph this. Again, like I said before, make this easy for yourself. I know for my hours I have to go 1 through 5. So over here, I'm gonna count up again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is my hours. And then on the Y, it's counting up by 12.5 or $12.50. So I might as well label it that way too, just to make it easier for myself. So I'm going to do this one as 12.5, 25, 37.5, 50, and then 62.5 up here at the top. And those are my dollars. Okay, now when I go to graph it, look how easy. 1 hour was 12.5, 2 hours was 25, 3 hours, 37.5, 4 hours was 50, and 5 hours was 62.5. And again, if he works 0 hours, he's making $0, so we can't go ahead and do that dot and connect them, because if he works 3.5 hours, he can make money then too. It will just be in between on the graph. All right, we are going to flip the paper over and do the back together, but I need to do that in a different video. So go ahead and close this one out and open the next video.